The Etruscan shrew is the smallest mammal by mass. To keep itself alive, its heart beats an astonishing 1,200 times every minute. But that furious pace comes with a cost, a lifespan of only about a year and a half. At the other extreme of the mammalian scale, the African elephant takes a much slower approach. Its massive heart beats just 30 times a minute, allowing it to live for up to 70 years in the wild. If you do the math, a curious pattern emerges. Multiply the shrew's rapid heart rate by its incredibly short life, and you get about 1 billion heartbeats. Multiply the elephant's slow pulse by its long 70 years lifespan, and you land at that exact same figure, 1 billion. From a tiny field mouse to a cheetah to a two-toed sloth, the math holds up. Regardless of their size, weight, or the environment they live in, practically every mammal on Earth gets roughly 1 billion heartbeats between the day they are born and the day they die. Biology operates on a strict mathematical metronome. To understand why life is restricted by this exact limit, we first need to look at what happens when scientists assume they know how biological scale works and get the math completely wrong. In the 1960s, the CIA was funding top-secret behavioral experiments under Project MKUltra. A team of researchers decided to test the psychological effects of LSD on an enormous animal subject, an Indian elephant named Tusko. The researchers knew the safe dose for a cat was 0.3 milligrams. Because Tusko weighed roughly 1,000 times more than a cat, they applied straight multiplication. They injected him with nearly 300 milligrams of LSD, 1,000 times the feline dose. The effects were immediate and devastating. Within 5 minutes, Tusko trumpeted, collapsed heavily onto his right side, and went into continuous seizures. Despite attempts to revive him with other drugs, he died shortly after. The research team made a catastrophic error in their calculation. They assumed that a biological need, in this case processing a chemical compound, scales perfectly in a straight linear line with body mass. Treating a living creature like a simple linear equation ignores the actual physical mechanics of life. As animals get bigger, a completely different mathematical rulebook takes over. The problem with getting bigger comes down to thermodynamics. Living organisms are constantly burning energy and generating heat inside their bodies. That heat can only escape to the environment through their outer surface area, their skin. Looking at this geometric model, we can see why perfect scaling fails physically. As a shape gets larger, its internal volume grows three-dimensionally, while its surface area only grows as a two-dimensional square. If you simply scaled up an animal perfectly linearly, its heat-generating volume would rapidly outpace its ability to cool down through its skin. The animal would literally boil alive. To prevent that, nature applies a different rule. Kleiber's law shows that an animal's metabolic rate scales to the 3/4 power of its mass. For every doubling of an animal's weight, its energy requirements only increase by about 68%. The bigger the mammal, the more energy efficient its cells become. If we apply Kleiber's law to the Tusko experiment, the tragedy comes into sharp focus. Because of this massive energy efficiency, Tusko's body processed chemicals at a much slower rate. He only needed about 178 times the metabolic output of a cat, not 1,000. The safe dose would have been around 53 milligrams, making the 300 milligrams he received a lethal overdose. Size dictates efficiency. By growing larger, an animal completely rewrites the speed at which its cells consume fuel. For decades, biologists knew the 3/4 power rule existed, but they couldn't explain why. In 1997, a group of scientists proposed WBE theory to trace this math back to its physical origin. They realized that to keep a body alive, nutrients have to reach every single cell. To do this efficiently, nature evolved space-filling, branching fractal networks, like our blood vessels, which crumple up massive amounts of surface area and pack it tightly inside a three-dimensional body. The specific geometry of these branching vessels dictates exactly how fast resources can be delivered, which in turn limits the speed at which the animal can burn energy. Because this transport system is so extensive in larger animals, their individual cells run significantly slower. This physical slowdown means a mammal's lifespan scales up at a positive 1/4 power of its mass, while its heart rate scales down at a negative 1/4 power. This equation demonstrates the final mathematical proof. When you multiply lifespan, which is mass to the 1/4, By heart rate, which is mass to the -1/4, the mass variables perfectly cancel each other out. You are left with a constant value, 1 billion. The billion beat limit is not a biological accident. It is the inescapable mathematical result of the branching fractal geometry required to keep a physical body alive. There is exactly one mammal that defies this universal rule: us. For the vast majority of human history, our ancestors hit their billion heartbeats and died, right on schedule. But around the mid-1800s, the adoption of germ theory, modern sanitation, and advanced medicine triggered a sharp upward deviation from the rest of the animal kingdom. We suffered massive setbacks, like the devastating 1918 flu pandemic, but the overall trajectory of human lifespan continued to skyrocket. We systematically suppressed the diseases and hazards that naturally capped our biological clocks. As a result, the average human today will experience nearly 3 billion heartbeats before they die. From a purely mathematical standpoint, we are living the lifespan of a much larger animal, like an elephant or a whale. Humanity successfully hacked the mathematical limits of mortality. We bought ourselves a full extra life, which raises the question of what grand mechanism actually powered this leap. If you track the soaring graph of human life expectancy over the last few centuries, it perfectly matches another historical trend: the explosive population growth of modern cities. A city functions like a massive artificial organism, governed by its own nonlinear scaling laws. Looking at this data split, we can see exactly how cities save energy. As a population doubles, physical infrastructure like roads, electrical cables, and gas stations do not double. They scale sublinearly, requiring about 15% less material per person. Just like a larger mammal, a larger city requires less physical energy per capita to maintain itself. But while infrastructure scales down, human output scales up. Socioeconomic factors like total wages, GDP, and the number of patents filed grow superlinearly, climbing by about 115% with every doubling in size. Density acts as a multiplier for innovation. This extreme density does bring proportional increases in crime and disease, that the net result is a massive engine of intellectual and scientific output. The same mathematical principles of efficiency that defined animal life are what make cities such powerful engines for progress. By concentrating into these urban networks, we generated the scientific breakthroughs needed to outpace our own biology, finally breaking the billion heartbeat limit that has defined mammalian life for millions of years.